our modelers, based on the best data we have available in Ohio, and again, that data will get better and better and refined. And that's why you'll see when you go and look online at our graph, it's sort of shadowy because it's from like our least amount to most. That will be at the peak surge that we could be seeing that many cases a day.
You're referring to 6,000, 8,000 cases at the same time? Is that what you're saying? A day?
A day.
New cases a day?
Yes, remember, this is doubling. In New York right now, it's doubling every 3 days.
And you agree that's around the May 1st time frame?
That's our best projection, and it's really holding true. That was some of the national modeling that had been done in the UK modeling, and it's looking, from our preliminary look, our first look into Ohio's data, that we had at least enough to do that general forecasting. It's looking like that, but everything we do, I know this sounds terrible, but the more we can push that surge off, the better our hospitals are getting ready. They're getting ready and building out their system, so every day matters.
The numbers that have been put out there are actually very frightening to people. But I can tell you, if you go back and look at Wuhan and Hubei and all of these provinces, when they talk about 60,000 people being infected, even if you said, oh, right, well, there's asymptomatics and all of that, so you get to 600,000 people out of 80 million. That is nowhere close to the numbers that you see people putting out there. I think it has frightened the American people. I think on a model that you just run full out, you can get to those numbers if you have zero controls and you do nothing. And we know that every American is doing something.
That will be at the peak surge that we could be seeing that many cases a day.
You're referring to 6,000, 8,000 cases at the same time? Is that what you're saying? A day?
A day.
New cases a day?
Either you have to have a large group of people who are asymptomatic, who've never presented for any test, in order to have the kind of numbers that were predicted. To get to 60 million people infected, or 6 million people infected, you have to have a large group of asymptomatics, because in no country to date have we seen an attack rate over 1 in 1,000. So either we're only measuring the tip of the iceberg of the symptomatic cases, and underneath it are a large group of people. So we're working very hard to get that antibody test, because that's a good way to figure out who are all these people under here and do they exist. Or we have the transmission completely wrong. So these are the things we're looking at, because the predictions of the models don't match the reality on the ground in either China, South Korea, or Italy. We are about 5 times the size of Italy. So if we were Italy and you did all those divisions, Italy should have close to 400,000 deaths. They're not close to achieving that. So these are the kinds of things we're trying to understand. Models are models. We're adapting now to the reality. There's enough data now of the real experience with the coronavirus on the ground to really make these predictions much more sound. So when people start talking about 20% of a population getting infected, it's very scary. But we don't have data that matches that based on the experience. And
there are blood tests in existence that I've heard about around the world, nothing that I've seen yet in this country. I know folks are working on it. It's called serologic testing, and that will be vitally important. You know, antibodies develop, particularly the IgG antibody will develop in response to the acute infection. And when we're able to actually do a blood test, not only does that need a lot less equipment, nasal swabs, kits and stuff, but it's quicker. And we'll be able to look back into history and see that somebody might have had it that was never diagnosed with a test, but we can see that their body actually fought off the disease. So there are fascinating things being done. And any of these medical interventions, if we're so lucky that one of them comes available and works, when that testing comes available, we'll leap forward in what we can do and how we can get out of this. But also, it will teach us so much about what has happened here. So any of that might even change the curve. If we find any antiviral that actually is effective and proven effective, we know vaccine is far off. That's the gold standard. That's what's really gonna kind of get us out of the woods as a country, is when we have a vaccine.
Initial safety study, Mark, is to see if I inject it in the arm, does it have some sort of idiosyncratic or bad reaction? There's another element to safety, and that is if you vaccinate someone and they make an antibody response and then they get exposed and infected, does the response that you induce actually enhance the infection and make it worse? And the only way you'll know that is if you do an extended study, not in a normal volunteer who has no risk of infection, but in people who are out there in a risk situation. This would not be the first time, if it happened, that a vaccine that looked good in initial safety actually made people worse. There was the history of the respiratory syncytial virus vaccine in children, which paradoxically made the children worse. One of the HIV vaccines that we tested several years ago actually made individuals more likely to get infected. So you can't just go out there and give it unless you feel that in the field, when someone is getting infected and exposed, being vaccinated doesn't make them worse. That's why you got to do a trial.
Yeah.
That's the gold standard. That's what's really gonna kind of get us out of the woods as a country, is when we have a vaccine.
Children don't seem to get sick with this. The real question is, do they get infected? And from an infectious disease standpoint, I would predict that they do get infected, but they have such a mild illness that you don't notice that they're infected, or they don't show any symptoms. The easiest way to find out is to do broad screening of children and figure out, are they really infected and asymptomatic, or are they not getting infected? I tend to believe that they're getting infected, but something about their system, the receptors in their lung, the nature of their immune response, is making it that they are not getting symptoms.
But then once they're infected and the infection runs its course and they're done, then my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that this is important for people to see, is that there's no such thing as a long-term carrier, right? So if a child has it, then they get the infection and then they're done, and they're not infectious once they're done as well, just like everyone else. Is that your understanding, or is that an open question?
Well, it's an open question, but all the evidence in other situations indicate, particularly evidence from China, indicate that once you are infected, you resolve the infection, you resolve the virus, you are not infected anymore. So we don't anticipate that we're going to have a problem where kids get infected, clear the infection, and then are a source to others. Even though it hasn't been formally proven, is highly suggestive that that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, and a similar question that I have here from Ladar is, can you get reinfected by the coronavirus if you've already had it?
Again, that hasn't been formally tested, but it is every reason to believe that this virus, when it comes to an immune response and long-term immunity, that it's not acting any different from any other virus. So I would project that once you're infected and you recover, that if you get exposed to this exact virus, you will not get reinfected. Remember, there are many different kinds of coronaviruses, but the one that infected you, you should be protected against.